Chapter 4.1, Part 3. We're still in Part 4 of the themes in the book, but this is this third audio PowerPoint, if that makes sense. So we're about to look at some man-made mountains. Really, we're talking about earthen mounds or pyramids. And these have been made for thousands of years, and in some cases, going way back, if they're not made of a solid material like a stone or fired brick, they aren't preserved that well. So we're going to look at the ziggurat of Ur. Now, the difference between this and the Egyptian pyramids, very similar looking, and there was trade, 4,000 years ago and so on, between Iraq and Egypt. They were aware of each other, but what is different here is this is mud brick and the Egyptian pyramids are made out of stone. Okay, the other thing that's important difference is that the Egyptian pyramids are tombs. They have interior chambers, and the ziggurat in Ur, again, this is modern day Iraq, does not have any interior chambers. You can kind of see how there's like a pile of dirt, if that makes sense, and then some mud brick that faces the entire structure, and that has to be replaced. It says it's heavily restored. It's been restored multiple times because they have to replace that brick. It's not unlike adobe. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's not significantly different. It's a desert climate. There is no stone available for them to build this pyramid. So for the Egyptian pyramids, there's a lot of theories beyond the entombment structure. It could be that the sun would hit it and it would have a gold top, and it would signal a certain time of year to plant in Egypt. But in Ur/Iraq, this was the domain of a priest, and he would be the intermediary to the god who protected the city. He's the chief administrator, and this would be his domain. He would have a place to be at the top. Also, if you think about dominance and impressing the masses of people, if there's no mountains around and there's no human-built structures of any significance, something this size is quite intimidating. The other thing that's important about this ziggurat is that the festivals were organized around the phases of the moon, and offerings were on the high platform. So certain things like sacred liquids such as water, milk, and blood might be left up here. And it's also, during certain seasons, it would be important to have these festivals. So it's also dedicated to the moon god Nana. So civic use and administrative use. If you think of it that way, it's kind of like a big civic center or city, structure. Now, this is an interesting area in Illinois. This is more recently discovered. Of course, this is a painting or a drawing of what it might have looked like. At this point, is very degraded. You can't really see much, but this is the Monk's Mound, and this was built in 1150, so almost 1,000 years ago. And this had about 6 square miles, an estimated population about 10 to 20,000 people. It was an organized society. So we're talking about Native Americans here that lived in Illinois at this time, and we have a lot of these structures all over the U.S. and Mexico and Central America, South America, and they find more and more of them all the time. Interestingly, there's some technology that's developed where even if it's like a heavily forested, even tropical forest, very dense, they can fly over and sense a geometric structure underneath the foliage. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if that's how this was found. Illinois is quite flat and not forested, so it was probably found, in a different way. And this perhaps, right by this river, it was something that has recently been used as well. So it was surrounded by 120 smaller mounds, and this is measuring about, I'm reading from the book here, 1,000 80 feet by 710 feet, and it's topped by 2 smaller platforms. Not much is known about this, but we can assume that it was important to the people around here. Same kind of an idea as there's a large sort of mountainous structure here. Possibly an elite residence, we don't know. Could be a temple. And it's aligned with the sun at the equinoxes. Stonehenge, similar to the summer solstice, is important. Now the equinoxes are during the year. The solstice is December and June, near where summer and winter start. The equinoxes are fall and spring. Okay, so I'll just clarify that. So for Stonehenge, for the idea for the summer solstice, that would be perhaps in England when you would want to plant your crop. So it's important to have a calendar for agrarian societies in order to plant their crops in a timely manner. If you don't know what month it is, if there's no printed calendar, I mean, you have to imagine this thousands of years ago, no printed calendar, there's no clocks, there's no timepieces, of course there's no cell phones. So you have to figure out when to plant your crop so it's ripe before the first freeze, and so you can harvest it and it doesn't get frozen and ruined and destroyed. It's very important. So in different cultures you're going to have a summer solstice or a spring equinox, that kind of thing, to tell you, and then you can count the days from there and know when to plant. Okay, so we're in a slightly different category here. This is going to be art supersized. This is large artworks, and we're at Stonehenge. So there's several pieces of large stones here. This is quite old, so this goes back 6,000, 7,000 years, maybe more. It's believed to be a giant calendar. Another art we're going to look at, which is supersized, is the Gates by Jean-Claude and Christo. Now, they went all over the world and did different sorts of temporary installation, large works on a landscape. And they're all very different. Most of them involve fabric in some way. But all these poles and this fabric, this orange material that we're seeing here, and it kind of follows this line, all of that was very temporary and only put up for a very short amount of time. So people would walk under it and experience it and explore it, nylon fabric that was sort of flowing in the wind, but it was sort of punctuating or accenting the space. It wasn't really about any sort of spiritual or you could say, it didn't have any deeper meaning to it. It was more entertainment. But a lot of volunteers and a lot of people from New York City or whatever the local area would be were recruited to work on these structures. So it goes 23 miles through Central Park, and it was only up for a little over 2 weeks, and tons of community support. It's unbelievable. So this says 600 installation workers, but that is probably underestimated to cut the fabric, sew the fabric, put these poles in place, put the pieces up. It's quite an endeavor. But the idea was large scale for Jean-Claude and Christo and temporary.